Begin the current Daf Masechet Kesuvos Daf Daf Kov. Begin on the bottom of Daf Tzadi Tesma base, 6 lines up in the bottom of the Yomim. We continue the halacha of the next Mishnah. Continue in a related vein, which we were speaking about when the woman sells from the estate and she makes a mistake. Like we said, that she sells that worth of 400 and she sells the last one that's 101 for 100. So we spoke about her margin of error. Now we're going to speak about that of the Bezdin. The Bezdin has their margin of error when they're selling from this estate regarding how much we allow them to make a mistake, and then more than that to avoid that. This is discussed in today's daf. This is discussed in today's daf. Our Shumat Yomi, like we said, the evaluation of the judges. Or let's say they under or over sell the estate by a sixth, how much that we would cancel what they're selling. One of the big svaras that come up in our Mishnah is what's called imkain. If that's the case, ma'koich bezin yafa. Like, if you're going to tell me that it's going to be void, so you're not giving so much power to the court because you're saying that what they're doing is not going to be valid. The Gemara contrasts our previous Mishnah, Amana Shatah, when the widow made a mistake. We said, she sold something 101 for 100. That's it, we threw out the whole sale, it's going to be void. On the other hand, Bezin Shatah, then we say that the sale is only going to be void if it's a discrepancy of a sixth. Now, what's the halacha regarding Shliach Shatah? That's the Gemara is going to ask, which one do we compare it to? When an agent makes a mistake, we compare it to that of the Bezdin, as we'll see Svaras Y, versus that of the Almana, which one do we compare that one to? Now, the Gemara also brings in not just making a mistake in how much the market value you were selling it for, over or under, but it also b'loy hachrasa. That if you sell it without making an announcement first, so we say that the mecher is going to be bottled if it's what's called bitvar shemachriz nalein, things that you usually announce on, or b'makom shemachriz nalein, places you usually make an announcement, or b'zman shemachriz nalein, if it's a time. And in contrast, sometimes the mecher is going to be kayim if it's bitvar or b'makom or b'zman she'ein machriz nalein, and then it is going to be a valid sale. So we begin the current daf on the bottom of the Tzadik Tesma base by the Mishnah. It says the Mishnah, as we said, the Mishnah is going to continue this theme regarding if you made a mistake in the evaluation of the sale of the properties of the orphans. So Shema Diyan, the evaluation of the judges. Let's say they sold under a sixth, or they added on a sixth, still says the Tanakama, Mechrin Batal. Their sale is, their sale is going to be void because that's a large discrepancy in the margin of error. Whereas Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg disagrees, says no, Mechrin Kain. It is going to be a valid sale. Why? They made such a huge mistake. There was a sixth of the price off. Because in Kain, if that's the case, then you can tell me it's going to be void. So what type of power are you giving to the courts? Because you tell me that they make a mistake, that's it, we're going to throw out what they're doing. They're the rabbis, they're the judges, they're the courts, they're the ones who make the decision, even if they're a sixth off. Now, also you get is b'koyres b'nei, but if they make, which really means to say an announcement, b'koyres just means to say that people are checking it out through the announcement. So we make an announcement, we're going to be selling this for this amount. So it's a letter of inspection that people get to view this for 30 days, 60 days, whatever this and that. So they make an announcement, we're going to be selling this. Then says the Mishnah, they sell something worth 100 but 200. Or that worth 200 out of 100. The sale is going to be valid because we didn't make a mistake. We made announcements, people were able to check this out for a month or 2 months, whatever this and that, and then we ended up selling for double or half. That, as long as you made a chraza, then says the Mishnah, it's not going to be considered as any fault of the courts. Now, the Gemara has an interesting question. So, Shliach, the halacha of the agent that makes a mistake, Kaman, to whom do you compare him to? Do you compare him to a widow that we said in the previous Mishnah that she makes even a minor mistake, it's going to be bottled? Like we said, Shabbat Mana B'din B'month. She says that with 101 for 100, we said the Mechra is going to be bottled. Or do we compare him to a judge, which we said that he can make a mistake up until a sixth? So actually, as we continue to talk about it, the Gemara said some machlekes. Rav Amar of Nachman, his version of Nachman was Shliach is Kedayanan. The agent is like the judges, which he gets up to a margin of error of a sixth. Rav Shmuel Bar Bizna, Rav Nachman, his version of Rav Nachman was come on like a widow. No, any small mistake is going to be void. So the Gemara explains why each one says what they say. Rav Amar of Nachman says Shliach Kedayanan, the agent is like the judges, which is Madian, just like the judges. They're not doing it. They're not selling it for themselves. They're doing it l'toivas haklal. Av shlich lav l'didei, he does not selling it for himself, he's just acting as an agent. Lafuka amana de l'dida, that's excluding that of the widow, which is for her. For her, you're doing it for yourself, you make a small mistake, that's it, it's void. So that's why he says the shliach is like the dayanim. On the other hand, Rav Shmuel ben Bisna, he says kamana. No, the agent is like the widow. Why? Because ma'amani chid, just like the widow is an individual, so too the agent is an individual their margin of error is very small. Lafuki bezdin derab, and we're conscious to the court who they are a public, and therefore when the serabim, their margin of error is going to be larger. So therefore, that's their machlekes. Do we consider the variable of that it's not for yourself, or do you consider the variable that you're an individual, and therefore that would make you either similar to that of the almana or similar to that of the bezdin? So the Gemara Hilchos Halacha is shliach kalmana. The agent is like the widow, which is like we said in the previous Mishnah. Even a small margin of error, even a small mistake, would go ahead and invalidate the sale. However, the Gemara says, why is this different than we learned in the Mishnah of Tzadik Tes on the base? The Mishnah says, if someone says to his agent, again, we just said the agent is like almana. If you make even a small mistake, it's going to be void. But what's with the Mishnah of Tzadik Tes on the previous daf? We said if someone says to Shliach Tzeibatam, go out and take off Truma, so he said, so what he should do is, he take Truma like that of the homeowner's type of personality. But let's say he doesn't know what type is the personality of the homeowner, then turn this, he should do the middle of the road, 1/50. Says the Mishnah, if he does 10 less or 10 more. Truma. Wait a second. I thought you said even one iota off is going to invalidate, like the almana. The almana sold 101 for 100. Oh, void. That was the previous mission. And shliach is like the almana. So why, if you're 10 off, more or less, is it going to be valid? But that's not shliach kalmana. So the Gemara, no, that's not true. That margin of error is very different than a regular margin of error. Hasma, but they keep in the ikin determined by ayin ra, since there are those that do take off truma in a stingy way, very determined by ayin ra, and then those who take off truma in a generous type of a way. Amalei, he could tell him lahachi am daticha. He says he could tell him, I evaluated you that you're the type of personality, and therefore that's not considered as a mistake really. But here he actually made a mistake. Amalei, the Mishaleach could tell him, you should not have made a mistake, and therefore you cannot compare that to the halacha we're saying of shliach kalmana. Yes, if he makes even one iota of a mistake, it's void. There is not really considered a mistake. It's saying that I thought you're that type of personality, and people of that type do 10 more or 10 less. Now the Gemara brings halacha related to the halacha of our Mishnah. Amar Rav Huna bar Chanina, Amar Rav Nachman. It says halacha gedei b'chachamim, which is said in the Mishnah that if it's going to be a sixth off, it's going to be batal, not like Rav Shloimy Schwartzberg. The problem is, says the Gemara, the less later Rav Nachman, doesn't Rav Nachman hold the svara of Rav Shloimy Schwartzberg, who disagrees in our Mishnah of Mar Koich Bezdin Yafa? If you recall, in our Mishnah we had a machlekes of the dayanin that they make a mistake of valuation of a sixth. Tanakama says it's void. You're sixth off, even though you're dayanin, it's off. Shloimy says no. If that's the case, Mar Koich Bezdin Yafa, you're totally pulling out the rug from underneath the judges. You're not giving them a certain authority and power. So Rav Nachman say halacha like Chachamim, that is, he doesn't sound like he holds like the svara Mar Koich Bezdin Yafa. Really? But Rav Nachman the Mishmur, Nachman himself says in the name of Shmuel the following halacha: Yisayimim, they have orphans, Shabbat Lachlik B'Nifsefim, they come to divide in their father's estate. So the halacha is Bezdin Mamid Lama Petrapis. What the courts do is that they appoint for every single one of the minors as his own caretaker, and each caretaker is in charge of a certain child. Ubarlem, and they select for every Petrapis selects for each of that child that he's in care of, Chel Gaf, a good portion, whatever he sees fit for that child. Higdilu, when they become adults, says Shmuel, the children can protest. Says, this is not, the guy who took care of me did a terrible job, and then we can protest. But that was Rav Nachman and Shmuel. For Rav Nachman, the day Rav Nachman himself says, no, Higdilu ein yochel limches. When they become adults, they cannot protest because they came back. So what did the courts do? Courts made caretakers and did a whole procedure and took care of them, and then they're going to be able to protest. Then they're pulling away the authority of the courts. Wait a second. You're saying Makoich Bezdin Yafa, and that's why you're disagreeing with Shmuel? But you yourself in our Mishnah say halachas like the Chachamim, not Rav Shloimy Schwartzberg, who's coming from the Svar Makoich Bezdin Yafa. So the Gemara Kash is not a difficulty. Why not? Because the toe. When in our Mishnah did Rav Nachman say Allah is like the Chachamim, is if he made a mistake. Rav Nachman's halacha here, where he disagrees with Shmuel, is delay toe. The caretaker didn't make a mistake. Says the Gemara, what? Idle toe. Every time the Apatrabas did not make a mistake, so why would they protest? What are they protesting then if you didn't make a mistake? By mistake or not? No, yes. It would be void. We wouldn't go with Makoyach Bezin Yafa. But by the case over here, he does go with Makoyach Bezin Yafa. But there's no mistake. What are they protesting? It says no beruches. They didn't make a mistake. When these orphans become older, it's regarding what direction it's in. This boy who gets older, he says, it would have been better had I had in the east. Because I have a field that I inherited from my mother's father, from a different family, over there too. So I'm not happy with what he chose for me. So that's what he's protesting about. That Rav Nachman says, no, Makoyach Bezin Yafa. In our Mishnah doesn't say Makoyach Bezin Yafa. It's because of a mistake. A mistake, we're not going to say Makoyach Bezin. There was no mistake. It's just he's not happy with what he got. Since it's like so Rav Nachman would say the principle of Makoyach Bezin Yafa. Never, there's no contradiction in Rav Nachman. Now, Kiyas Rav Dimi Amar, he says there was actually a Maisa, there was a story. V'asur Rebbe K'div Chacham. Rebbe did like the words of the Chacham in our Mishnah that the Dayanim were sixth off, and Rebbe says, "I'm sorry, this is bottle, this is not good, it's off." And Omer fun of Parta said in front of Rebbe, who was Benoy Sheb Elazar ben Parta, who was Ben Benoy Sheb Parta Gadol, where they all have the Zayda's names, and from the great Parta. He said to Rebbe, if you tell me that the court's off at 6, that you're going to invalidate the whole sale, so what's you taking away the authority of the court? So the Rebbe went and he undid the story, where it seemed appropriate to him what was explained in Halacha by Mishnah of B'Shem Gamliel of Mkei Makoyach Bezin Yafa, and therefore he backed away. He undid the whole story of what he had done. Now that's one version. Rabbi Dimi Masnehachi, he taught like we just said. But Rav Safra Masnachi, he has a different version of how this went. My sister was Ubikish Rebbe Lasik Devecham. Rebbe had not yet done like Devecham. He didn't like be chayz on it. He wanted to do. He's about to paskin, and Amalaf on the part of Benisham Lazabin, part of Ben Benisham, part of that God. He says, wait a second, King Rebbe, if you're going to do this, Makar Bezin Yafa, what type of authority are you leaving for the courts? So Loi Asir Rebbe Samaiser. Rebbe didn't do this, and he held back, and he didn't invalidate it. Says the Gemara, what's these two different versions? Let's say Rav Dimi and Rav Safra, they're different versions of the story. What they're disagreeing about is the following principle. Rav Dimi, his version was, the first version, Savai holds, if the judge makes a mistake, Bidvar Mishnah, if he doesn't do like an explicit Mishnah, Chayzer, we undo his ruling. In other words, we don't say, which sometimes we do, no, what was done by the judge is done. And the judge has to pay out of pocket. No, that's only when he makes a mistake by what's called shikol adas, by just, by svara, like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin. Now, here, Rashi explains, it's considered Dvar Mishnah, because although the Chacham disagreed with Reb Shimon has a good svara, as we said that Rebbe held that was a good svara. So it's like almost making a mistake in the Mishnah. So Reb Dimi's version held, yes, he was chayzer, he undid the ruling. Whereas Amar, Safra held that no. He didn't say the story as Asa V'Hichzer, that he did it and he undid what he did. Because Safra, he held that if it would have been done, Ein Chayzer. You would not be able to back out because you are not Chayzer B'Dvar Mishnah. So Zimah, no, it's not true. The Kulam Atah B'Dvar Mishnah, everyone agrees that if you make a mistake in the explicit Mishnah, Chayzer, the ruling is undone. But Amar Safra, the first version held that was the story. Master said that was the story, nothing to do. Not because he held that it couldn't be, and therefore he said a different version. That's just the story that he heard. Now, going back to what we said before regarding the widow selling and regarding the bezin selling, some of Yisri says Armalta de Zavina, when a widow sells achrayis, so the responsibility of the sale is a yasmin, is on the orphan. So if let's say it turns out that the field that was sold by the widow was stolen, or actually there was a lien to someone else, and then therefore it's grabbed away from the buyer for the debt, so then the buyer could go back on the orphans, because the widow is really the agent of the orphans. So do Bezdin Dezaven, if the courts are selling the fields of the orphans for the sustenance of the woman and the daughters, Achrayas asked me the responsibility, insurance is incumbent upon the orphans. Someone says, Pshita, obviously it's their estate and their responsibility, and they're just selling off for debts for the widow, for the mizainis of the bandas and the isha. So the Gemara says, no, Alman Isle, we didn't have to tell you the case of the widow, that's Pasha. We needed to tell you the case of the court. What's the chiddush of it there? Of course the responsibility should be on the orphans. So it says, no, when you say it's them at base, call the Zam made Beidina, whoever buys from the courts, when the courts are selling the orphan's estate, that the intention is, since the courts always sell with hachraza, with announcements, the buyer is confident. Had there been anyone contesting this property, they would have contested in the whole month that the courts want to make an announcement. Rabbi said, we're going to be selling the estate of the late Max Eisenstein. And so people would have came and contested. So therefore, like Rashi explains, I would think to say that actually the guy who's buying Shaloi Bachrayas. I don't need insurance. I know no one's going to come and contest it because they had a whole month. Everyone making announcements all around town. They had these posters and placards, and everyone knew. Kamashman, that's the chiddush to say no. There is achrayas, even when Bezdin sells, and the achrayas is going to be ayasmi. That's the chiddush of this halacha. But of course, the achrayas is going to be on the asmi. The chiddush was that there is even going to be achrayas in the first place when the court sells. Now we said in the Mishnah, he says that even if it's more than a sixth, still the halacha is going to be that it's going to be a valid sale by that of the chacham. So the Gemara says, "Ba'ad kama." Now, how much? I mean, how much of a mistake could they make that we're going to still say it's a valid sale? So I'm not Yehuda. Says ad palga. Up until half, if you make a mistake of half, up until half the amount, it's still going to be valid. Let's say it's something worth 200 for 100, something worth 100 for 200, it's going to be valid. So you see the case they gave was 200 for 100, but let's say it's something 250, then even they would agree that it's going to be void. Now later, says, let's say the courts sell without an announcement. So then actually, the Nasu Kamisha Tabit Vamisha, that's almost like as if it was made a mistake in the halacha of a Mishnah, and we're going to say it's undone. And again, we don't say that, no, whatever they did, and they have to pay out of pocket. No, it's Hadri Zvini. We say like it wasn't done in the first place, because they didn't make an announcement. But the Gemara has a question on the wording. Nasu? Let's make it as if it was a mistake in Dvar Mishnah Chayzim? Vadeto. What are you talking about? This is a definitive mistake in a halacha that's taught in the Mishnah, and it's not Nasu, let's make it like a Torah. This is a Torah Mishnah. How so? Where do we find? What's the Mishnah? Because now we learned the Mishnah that says in Eirchin, Shema Yisayim, the evaluation of the properties, when you're selling that of the orphans, you make an announcement for Shleshim in 30 days. For Shema Hektish, when you're evaluating to sell the properties, when the treasurer is selling properties of Hektish, Shishim, you make an announcement for a period of 60 days. And you make announcements morning and night. So you see, the explicit mission in Erechin, that Shema Yisayim, you make Hachraza for 30 days, day and night. So of course if you make without Hachraza, it's not Nasu Kamisha Tabid. This is a Tabid Mishnah. Says, well, yes, but had we only had the Mishnah in Erechin, I would have said, Shliach. I would have thought if it came out through an agent. Abba Bezin, but if the courts themselves actually do it, then no, I wouldn't say that it's a Tabid Var Mishnah. Maybe the halacha would only be for a Shliach. Mashma, that's why I had to tell you this halacha of Rabbi Yosef to tell me that even if the Bezdin does it, it's going to be like a Tabid Var Mishnah, it's going to be Chayz. But however, the Gemara says, Eisir Vashal Ameimer. Ameimer, his halacha was that if the courts sell it without an announcement, it's like Tabid Var Mishnah, it's going to be Chayz. So that Rav Ashi asks to Ameimer from our Mishnah. What did we say in the Mishnah? We said, Shema Dayanin, the evaluation of the judges, if Shepech Rishtos or Yisir Rishtos, we said if they're a sixth off, more or less. We said Mechem Batal, this is going to be void. Now the diuk is, the inference is, Hashab B'Shabbat. But let's say sell it for the right amount, Mecher Kaim, it's going to be valid. My love isn't it Deloy Achers, where even though no announcement was made, says Imam Lai, we're talking about the Achers, there's no Raya. We thought maybe okay, like, if you're not off, then it's okay, even if you didn't make an announcement. Says Gemara, no, we're talking about that you made an announcement, because if you didn't, maybe actually it would be void. Says Gemara, in the sefer of the achres, but if the sefer is talking about when you made an announcement, obviously the ratio would lie achres. Then the ratio would be talking about when you didn't make an announcement. Because if you made one already, why do you have to say it again? Because it telling safe, we learned the safe in the Mishnah. Said in also we get is b'kaitis. The Mishnah ended and said if they made an igetis b'kaitis, which essentially means to say achraz, it's like you make a letter of inspection where people come to check out what we're selling. Then said the Mishnah for the machur shabba manam b'masayim that even if you sold something worth 100 or 200, a shabba masayim manam 200 for 100, we said nothing kind. Sale's going to be valid. Well, that's because you had an announcement. Sounds like that the Reisha was without an announcement. And we said that if you sell it a sixth off, it's going to be invalid. But if you sell it for the right price, it's going to be valid. You see, not like Amim is teaching that B'loi HaCharaza, even though with no announcement, it is going to be valid. So the Gemara says, no. You're right. The Reisha is talking about B'loi HaCharaza. There's no announcement. And still B'loi Kash is not a difficulty on the Meimer, then why isn't it Chayzin? Because Khan, when did we say Amim is teaching, was talking about B'dvar Shabbat Riznalei. Was talking about regarding things that we make an announcement on it. If I can, the Mishnah is talking about B'dvar Shabbat Riznalei, on things that you don't make an announcement. So it's not things that you make an announcement. So therefore, as long as you want a shtus, a sixth off, it's going to be valid. Says the Gemara, what are you tell me that that's a difference. And maybe it's one things that you usually announce. So that is a avoidable type of a sale. So what's that Mishnah talking about? Things that you don't normally make announcements on. So they are havadim, slaves, v'matalin, movable items, v'ashtaris, and documents, which is that they would sell off the documents that are owed to the assignment to other people. Now, why these things would you not make an announcement for? So the Gemara explains. Avadim time, why by slave wouldn't you make an announcement? Because they're going to hear that they're being sold, and they don't want to leave this family they were with all these years, and they're just going to flee. They can become a fugitive. So you don't want to make announcements. And why don't you make announcements of movable items and documents? Because everyone's gathering to see them, to buy them, and someone's going to steal it. So that's what, when everyone comes to inspect the merchandise, by karka will make announcements because you can't steal it. But these things, you don't make achros, that's why the mission is going to be valid, because even though it's below achros, but another things that you make an announcement. But if somebody make an announcement, I mean would be correct, that it would be void if you didn't make an announcement. Or based on the second approach you could say is, not that we're talking about different items that you make or you don't. Kana maybe is talking about b'shashim achrizim. At a time, so there's either the object, if it's a type of thing, or at a time that you make an announcement, as Moshe can explain. There are certain times that there's no opportunity to wait for the days of announcements. Whereas Khan, the Mishnah is talking about b'shashim achrizim, at a time when you don't make. So therefore, even though you're not making an announcement, that's not a reason to make it void. Because Amin Adai, then Adai explained, l'charga, to pay up to the government, to the king, the head tax of the orphans, or the mezayno to give the sustenance, or the gvura, or for burial, all those mezamninim le'achrast, although generally you sell from the orphans after making an announcement, those things you sell without an announcement. So Amim is talking about something at a time when you do make announcements. The Mishnah is talking about a time when you don't make an announcement because it's, let's say, by a burial or whatever. So again, this is not a contradiction. A third approach, says the Gemara, by saying if you want, you could say, this Khan, a name is talking about b'makim shemachrizim. So we spoke about objects or times, and now we're talking about or in the place that you make announcements. That's what our name is talking about. Khan, the Mishnah is talking about b'makim shemachrizim, the place where you don't make announcements. What does that mean? Rabbi Nachman says, because there are certain places they don't make announcements, like in Arda. They never made a letter of inspection. So if in Arda, if you didn't make an achraza, that's not going to validate it, because they never do. So again, it depends on the location. Now, the Gemara just says, interesting, there's some they thought that the reason why in Arda they never made achraza because everyone is well versed in evaluating products. So you don't have to make announcements for like 30 days that people can say, how much is this worth? Everyone knows. But says the Gemara, no, Yomi said, to me it was explained from Rabbi Nachman, the reason why they wouldn't make announcements when they're selling these items because they would call the people that would buy these objects, b'nei achli nichsed achras, and the people that are consuming the objects that were sold with announcements. What does that mean? It was a disgrace for people if you would buy objects that were sold by a court sale, because who's selling in the bankruptcy and the fire sales and all these different things? A guy couldn't pay up his mortgage, so the creditors were pressing the orphans or the borrower. So if you're getting it, you're buying it for the bank, you're paying very cheap. So people would embarrass them and say, you're the Ochle Sadas Akraza. You Nebuch, you're an accomplice in the crime. Some guy couldn't pay up his mortgage, and then you bought it for a quarter of the price. So it was embarrassing in Yardah. That's why they never had achraza. But again, that's just a sidebar. But the point is, there are certain places they don't make achraza. In those places, there would not be a reason, obviously, and that's the case that our Mishnah was talking about. That even though they didn't make achraza, that would not invalidate it. Now another halacha. I'm reading Mishmul. He says, "Metatlan shal yusayim." Regarding the movable items of orphans, so you evaluate them and you sell them immediately, meaning right after their father's death, that they shouldn't deteriorate. Rav Chizam Amavimi, he says, however, that no you wait to sell it in the marketplace, at the fair. Says they actually not disagree. This teaching of Rav Chizda is the mikriv, is if the day it's close to the day of the shukah of the market. But if the day of the market is a month off, then obviously you would sell it right away. The Gemara brings a story actually related to this. Rav Kahana have a biyad shichra that Rav Mesharsher bar Chilkoi Yasma. Rav Mesharsher bar Chilkoi was an orphan. Rav Kahana had his beer. I mean, he was a caretaker for his beer. Shayad Riglo. He held on to it up until the Yom Tov time, because Amr says Avagav did naval be'itzadsta. Although the taste is going to start souring a little bit, because if you hold on to the beer too long, it starts deteriorating the taste. But still, Maisi Zuzah Khalifa. It's still going to bring sharp money, meaning it's going to be quickly to sell, because everyone needs beer on the Simchas Beis Sheva, and people are going to bring money, and there's no credit, and everyone's paying cash, so it's like, it's worth it to hold on to it, like we said regarding the Yom of the Shukah, even though it's going to get a little bit lower quality. Another related story, Ravina Zuti Yasna. Ravina had the wine of the orphan Ravina Zuti. Now, that was Bar Achsahab, it was his nephew. Now, he also had his own wine that he wanted to sell. So Kamaskele Sikha, he was taking it, he was transporting it to Sikha, the name of a place, to sell it over there. So also coming to Rav Ashi, came in front of Rav Ashi, he said to Ma'alam Tuye Bahadon, could I take the orphan's wine with me? What's the problem? Rashi says he was concerned, you have to be careful with the assets of orphan. He was concerned that the ship might sink, and then it's going to be a loss for the orphans. So Malay said to him, Zil, go, the orphan's wine is not better than yours. If you're transporting your own wine, you don't have to be concerned about their sinking. Now, look at the next Mishnah, continue on this theme about, now going back to the widow again, which is the Perik Aman and the Zainis, which is talking about when she's selling the assets for her ksuba. So back to her halacha of ksuba, Me'enes, regarding a woman that refuses, meaning if she's a katana that was married, it's a rabbinic marriage, is halacha that she could refuse up until she becomes bas mitzvah from the marriage. So if, let's say she just walks out, which she's allowed to, or hashniya, which is halacha, what's called a shniya l'arayis, which are rabbinic arayis, explained in Yavamas Daf Chafal from Alf. It's not biblically not erva, but rabbinically it's an erva. Ova islandess. An islandess is a woman that turns out that she doesn't have the capacity, her body is very different, she doesn't have the capacity of having children. All these three women, Eilen Ksuba. They don't get a Ksuba. Why? So Rashi explains. The Me'enis, the woman who walks out, the 11-year-old girl, since she left on her own. Ksuba is only if you get divorced by the husband. The secondary erva, what's called the shniya, is a rabbinic penalty. As the Gemara says, because she actually seduces him to get married. Why? She doesn't lose anything when she gets married, because she doesn't become puzzle, because she's only rabbinic erva, and her child's kosher. So therefore she's the one that she talks him into getting married, even though they're rabbinically forbidden, and therefore we penalize her that she doesn't get ksuba. And the islandess is because it's the meketh tois, mistaken acquisition. I would never have married you had I known that you don't have the capacity. So they don't have a ksuba. And v'lei peiros. What does it mean they don't peiros? Two interpretations in Rashi. Either means din peiros. What does it mean, the din of the peiros? It means redeeming her when she's a captive woman. There's a takans chachamim that because the husband gets to eat the peiros of her nichsi belog, so then he has to redeem her. That was saying he doesn't have to redeem her if she gets taken a captive. Why? Because the redeeming her is a t'nai of the ksuba. The stipulation of the ksuba is like the ksuba itself. Now, since we just said a second ago that she doesn't get a ksuba, she doesn't get the t'nai ksuba either, which is being redeemed. Another interpretation Rashi says is that no, that Beloy Paris means to say if the husband ate the Paris, he doesn't pay her back the Paris Nifsim Melog that he ate. Meaning, even though the Gemara tells us that they instituted that the redeeming her as a captive is what gives him the right to eat the Paris Nifsim Melog, and here you can't say, I'm going to take you back as a wife. Because let's say the case of a secondary erva, even so he seemingly doesn't have any right to the payers, he doesn't have to pay up the payers that he ate. Because it's like ksuba, it's like the ksuba. And just like the rabbis penalized her that she doesn't get the tzayim barza that she brought in from her own in the Torah of the ksuba, so they penalize her that she doesn't collect also the payers that he ate from the t'nai ksuba of the peri, which that's a t'nai of the bezdin that it's not written in the shtar, that also she's not going to get. And says the Mishnah further, also, getting fed is also a t'nai of ksuba. Now, later on, in the last paragraph of Kov Zayin Mabeis, the Gemara is going to tell us, when did we say that a me'enes, a woman who just walks out, 11-year-old girl, doesn't get mezainis? She can't say when she's living with him, because her husband would be obligated on mezainis then. It just means to say that if he went overseas, and she borrows, and she eats, and then she gets up and she does miyun, then he doesn't have to pay. That's what it means to say that she doesn't have mezainis in that situation. Also, the worn-out garments which she brought in from her father's household to be evaluated, and she wears it, that he doesn't have to give it back to her, the secondary erva, when she leaves. Now it says the Mishnah, but regarding one of the three women, in mitchila nasal shem alnus, let's say he knew she was an alnus, he married her for that purpose, then yesh l'ksuba, then she actually would get a ksuba. There's no mekach toys, obviously, because he knew she was an alnus. Now, however, although we said these women don't get a ksuba, but alman l'kohen gadol, which is a biblical isser, a widow to a kohen gadol, grusha b'chalitza kohen hedjed, which these are isuri lavan, divorcee or chalitza kohen hedjed, or mamzeres nesim l'Yisrael, mamzeres nesim l'Yisrael, or bas Yisrael, bas mamzer, they're actually yesh l'ksuba. These women actually have a ksuba. Why? Because she actually becomes invalidated when she marries this man, and their children become puzzled through this marriage. So actually, she would not try to get him to get married. He actually convinces her to get married, and therefore the rabbis penalize him. Then he actually has to give her ksuba in that case. So the Gemara adds on regarding our Mishnah, as Taisa explains. Rav teaches regarding the opening case for the case of a me'enes. Now me'enes essentially is a young girl who's leaving the marriage. But what's unique about me'enes is that she's walking out. So Rav taught in the Mishnah like this: Kitana yetz meget. If the 11-year-old girl is being given a get by her husband, then still in ksuba. She still doesn't get a ksuba, because he holds the marriage of a child is like just like basically being seduced. It's not a real marriage, so she's not getting a ksuba. And Bakoshkim Menes, for sure, like the halacha of Mishnah, when she's walking on her own, and the husband's not even divorcing her, for sure she's not getting a ksuba. That's Rav. But Shmuel taught me'enes in ksuba. No, only the case of when she walks on her own, she doesn't get a ksuba. Abo yetz beget, the husband's giving her a get, divorcing her. Yes, like ksuba, she's going to get a ksuba. And the Gemara explains, "What's the Shmuel Tanei Shmuel going according to his reasoning?" Because Shmuel says, "Me'enes in ksuba." Yes, the me'enes did not get a ksuba, but yetz beget, yes, like ksuba. And he actually explains a few different things, that there's a difference between the me'enes or yetz beget, even though it's both 11-year-old girl leaving the marriage. The me'enes, for example, if she's refusing the marriage, that would not invalidate her from marrying his brothers. She's permitted to his relatives. Why? Because essentially she's like a woman who is seduced or violated, as the Mishnah teaches in Mamas of Tzadik Zayin and Aleph. You're allowed to marry the man the brother or the father of the man who raped you. Because here it was not a real marriage, she just walked out. It was rabbinically a marriage. And so too, she doesn't become invalidated as a krusha, because that's not being divorced. Miyun is uprooting the original marriage. She says, I don't want the kedushin that my mother did for me. But let's say Yaitza Beget, let's say she's a get. Then Pasmanach, and then she is not allowed to marry his brothers. And the possible she would be invalidated as a grusha. Another difference is me'enes, if she just refuses, she doesn't have to wait 3 months after she does miyun, because it uprooted the marriage, and she's not like the other women that chacham were masakin, that anyone else who is married has to wait after she leaves her husband 3 months because of the paternity of the child. Even when you know it's not negay, you still have to. But as the Gemara continues, top of Kaval and Aleph, Yitza Beget, if she leaves it again, then she has to wait 3 months. So although by a child, a young girl, there's no doubt that she's not pregnant, it doesn't make a difference. Chacham did not differentiate regarding the Tarkanis. If you were married and you got divorced, you have to wait. So again, so you see that Shmuel is the one that differentiates between Ma'enes and Yitza Beget, and therefore now Mishnah says it's specifically Ma'enes and not by Yitza Beget, not like that of Rav. The Gemara just says, regarding Shmuel's teaching, my Kamash Shmuel, what are you even teaching over here? Tanin Lakulu, all of them is taught in the Mishnah Masechet Zivamis. Mishnah says, if someone does refusal, 11-year-old girl, let's say, to a man, So who mutter b'kribba said he's permitted to marry her relatives, even tez b'kribba, she's permitted in his relatives. And Balei Pas Makuni does not marry different Makuni like a Gusha. But Nasla, again, if he gives her a get, who has to b'kribba said that he's permitted in her relatives, he has to b'kribba, she's permitted in his relatives, or Pas Makuni validates Makuna. So these are all taught there in the Mishnah. It says, well, yeah, one case wasn't taught over there. So the halacha of waiting 3 months, that was necessary to say, which that wasn't taught there in the Mishnah. That's what Shmuel is teaching us, and that's again one of the differences between Mima'enes and being given a get. And again, that's what we're just saying. Shmuel the Shitasai, not like that of Rav, and never the halacha Mishnah specifically Mima'enes, but if you get to the get, then actually Shmuel would hold that she would get a Kesubah thing to any time. So